So, hello and a formal welcome to everyone. It's so lovely to see so many of you here today. Thank you for giving up your time to join us at another Let's Chat Trust fundraising session. And for those that you that are new today, we've got quite a lot of new people with us today. A special welcome. I hope you'll join us at this lovely community that we've created here every month. I'm Stacey. For anyone who doesn't know, I'm a trust fundraising consultant with Money Tree Fundraising. Money Tree Fundraising has been around for more than 14 years. We provide support with training, with coaching, and with the more practical things around trusts, major donors, and capital appeals. So for me, I concentrate on the trust side of things. So I'm helping people with really kind of practical prospecting and getting those applications out there, doing application reviews, supporting you with that prospect line, supporting you with some training, with some coaching. So anything to do with trust that you might need a hand with, Money Tree Fundraising can probably do that for you. These sessions are all about being honest and practical and having some really good conversations. There are absolutely no silly questions, no perfect answers, and you will find no judgment here. We're all here to learn from each other and share our experiences and help each other. We'll be using some polls today. They'll pop up on your screen. So please do take a moment to respond. Even if you're not entirely sure of your answer or if your answer doesn't fit, there'll be a chance for you to put your thoughts in the chat as well. As always, there's no right or wrong answer. It just really helps us to understand where everybody is and shape where the conversation will go. Again, the chat is also always open throughout these sessions. So if something resonates, if you have a question or you want to share an experience, please do that. Pop that in the chat. And like I said, if you're feeling brave and want to come on camera or just to turn your microphone on, please do that too. I'll try and keep an eye on everything as we go through, but if you've been to these before, you'll know I'm not very good at reading and speaking at the same time. I get easily distracted, so work with me a little bit. So we spent March looking honestly at the trust fundraising landscape. There were some really good reports out there last month, wasn't there, that we had a look at what the data told us in those reports, and perhaps more importantly, we looked at what those reports didn't tell us and what we could fill in from our own experience. And what came through really clearly is that the sector is consolidating, getting more competitive, and success rates are really under pressure. And where they're under pressure, the quality of relationships with those funders matters more than ever. So today, that's what we're going to dig into and have a look at what that looks like in practice for us as working trust fundraisers. Not the theory, not the textbook version, the real everyday building and maintaining of relationships with the funders who matter to you the very most. So before we go into our poll, I just wanted to take a moment with this slide. Some of you who joined us in March might recognise this slide because I've taken it from the presentation we looked at and the session we had in March, because I think it really helps to set the scene for everything we're going to talk about today. If you missed our March Let's Chat Trust Fundraising, it will be available on our Money Tree Fundraising YouTube channel for you to have a little look at and see some of the context that we're going to talk about now. When the sector isn't growing rapidly, because it isn't, when economic uncertainty, with everything that's going on in the world, with the wars that are going on, with the political turmoil that's going on, funders can often become a little bit more cautious about their commitments. And then what do they fall back on? They fund organisations that they feel confident in, ones they know, ones they trust, ones who've kept them informed, ones who've been honest with them, who've made them feel like a genuine partner in all of that work. And that's not kind of soft, lovely to have fluffy stuff if you have time to do. Having a good relationship and stewardship in place is a strategy. Stewardship is protective. It protects your income that you already have, which in many ways is more important than chasing some of that newer income in a tougher market, because we've all seen the figures, haven't we, around that it's about 1 in 10. If you have cold applications, if you have a really cold pipeline, you get about 1 in 10 that are successful. So if we can do all that we can do to warm up those potentials, and keep the ones that we have really nice and warm and involved with what we're doing, it makes our pipeline much warmer and much more likely to be sustainable long term. Cultivation and stewardship are two sides of the same coin. If you're only thinking about a relationship once that grant has been confirmed, you're already potentially a step behind your competitor. Someone else is in that pile of applications. Taking time to build relationships before you've even submitted an application can really pay off. And like we said, warm up that pipeline that you have. Sorry, someone's still not on mute. If you don't mind just popping yourself on mute, just check that you are all on mute, just because we're recording and I don't want any of your conversations to be recorded but accidentally and then put on YouTube. So let's launch our first poll. Bear with me because this is never straightforward. Where is it gone? Well, it's never where you want it to be. Here we go, polls. Here we go. So let's launch that now, hopefully. There you go. So how confident do you feel about your trust stewardship right now? Really confident? I have a clear approach. Fairly confident. I do some of it really well. It's patchy. I know I could do more if I had more time. Honestly, it's mostly reactive. So if you can see that poll, if you can have a look at that and put in how you feel. If what you feel isn't there, please feel free to share it in the chat. This is an absolute safe space. So feel free to add that in and put what you feel. We won't judge you. Give you a few minutes to fill in that poll. Thank you everyone for who's put that already. So we've got some fairly confident, which is fantastic. Patchy, I know I could do more. That's, you know, that's kind of where I see a lot of people. They know what they need to do. They do some of the kind of aftercare after they've had a successful application really, really well, but maybe not some of the more of the building the relationships beforehand as well as they would like to. And that's mostly because we just don't have the time to be able to do that. So thank you everyone. It's really useful to have that information so we know where everybody is and how we're all feeling about our trust stewardship. What I think is, I just want to make sure we're all talking about the same thing. Stewardship to some people can mean different things, and I think it's worth being really clear about what we mean. I put something on LinkedIn a couple of days ago, a couple of weeks ago, about stewardship, and I had some pushback about stewardship being quite a negative word, because it felt quite clinical and it felt like it wasn't something where we were looking at it in a relational way. Whereas actually for me, I use stewardship because it's a term that's quite well known amongst us trust fundraisers, isn't it? It's something we use all around and you'll see a lot in training sessions. But because stewardship for me has never felt like anything but relational, it's always felt very it's about making people warm and it's about finding those I thought of you moments. I've never seen it as a negative word. I've always seen it as something very much about building those warm relationships. So I think, I will use stewardship, but it's just interesting to hear other people's points of view, isn't it, around what that word means to people. What does stewardship mean to you? What does it look like for you? If you want to pop a word or two in the chat, that would be fantastic. I think it's just really interesting to see, what for me stewardship, this is part of it, but for me this isn't where it starts and ends. It isn't just in the left hand column a thank you letter and nothing else, waiting until the grant runs out before you know that you need to put in a new application, so then you go and do that. Only getting in touch when you need something, sending generic updates that anyone could have. It's not tailored to that particular trust. I'm getting some good responses in the chat around what stewardship means to them. Yeah, a fertile relationship, absolutely, where you're stewarding it, something warm, something nurturing, something lovely. So for me, you can see in the right hand column, It's building a genuine relationship over time. It's keeping funders informed, not just at reporting time, but those, like I said, those little, I saw these and thought of you moments, something to do with the funder, with the project that they've funded, something, a really good news story, something that they're going to enjoy hearing about, something that will make them feel good about the fact that they've invested in you, your project, and your organization, making them feel like a partner and not just a cash machine. That's what those little bits of information can do. And showing impact in ways that matter to them is really, really important. Stewardship isn't something that happens after fundraising. For me, it is part of fundraising. The relationship you build between those grants determines whether there's a next grant, whether you've kept them warm, whether they're interested in what you do. So let's have a look. So I've seen some things popping up in the chat that might actually work really well with this next question that we're going to do here, which is, I'm just going to launch the poll now. What's your biggest stewardship challenge right now? And I think where I've just had a sneaky look in the chat and seen some of these things that people are putting around stewardship. What are you finding that's your biggest challenge at the moment? If you can see that poll and you want to participate, please do. There's a couple of options: finding the time alongside everything else, knowing what to say between reports, getting access to the right contact at the funder, recovering a relationship after a difficult conversation or rejection. My organization doesn't prioritize it. It's hard to make the case internally. So if you want to just pop your thoughts and feelings around that in there, getting access to the right contact of the funder is coming up quite high. Knowing what to say between reports is absolutely something that's coming out quite high as well. Yeah, but that's two things that I see quite often that comes up. You should be in touch, but you sit down to write something and you just don't know how to frame it. You don't know what to say. And hopefully some of the tips that I'll give you today will help with some of that. Fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, knowing what to say is coming out quite high and getting the right person. Definitely. Fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. I'm just going to pop into the chat and have a look. Invite only, Cheryl, we're going to touch on in a little minute. That's a question that I had come in before this. Tyrone, I think another issue is managers. Oh, it skipped then before I could finish reading that one out. Hang on, let me see if I can find it again. Oh, typical, is it? Issue is managers not even understanding why stewardship is important and yet time consuming. Absolutely, that's something that I see come up quite often. And it is. Stewardship is so important. Like I said, stewardship is part of that fundraising process. And bringing some of your managers into something like this, where we're discussing things that are important to trust fundraisers, setting some time aside to have those conversations with them, have those conversations with trustees as well, if you can, is really, really important. To the right contact, unsolicited funders, absolutely, Bobby. Yeah, we're going to discuss that in a little bit. Knowing what to say that is meaningful, what is wanted by funders. Often something feels better than nothing, but there's a worry about saying the wrong thing too. Absolutely, Dan. And I think, and again, we're going to touch on this later, if you've been successful with a funder, asking them what they want to hear from you and how often is one of the biggest things that you can do to help you with some of that stewardship, because they will absolutely let you know especially if you've already built up that relationship with them. So are none of these that we put in the poll biggest challenges now where the trust will respond? Absolutely. That is something that we're seeing more of now, isn't it? As more and more trusts get really busy. Definitely. Some actively discouraged it. A colleague of mine was very upset after being spoken to rudely by someone who answered the phone at trust we wanted to apply to. I'm so sorry that happened to one of your colleagues, Sarah. That's just unacceptable, isn't it? When someone's rude to somebody, there's just no need for it, especially if they actively advertise that they have a phone number or an email address that you can contact. I think that's part of the problem, is trusts that aren't very good at communicating what they want, helping to narrow down the field for us when we're trying to look for if we might be a good fit or not. And that if they don't want any contact by telephone, removing that information from anything that's public so that we can't give them a ring. We're not mind readers, are we? All we can do is try our best and try and build those relationships. But I'm so sorry that that happened to your colleague. There's just no need for rudeness, is there? Um, fantastic. Fantastic. Okay. So let's move on. So let's talk about your pipeline, because I think this is where the gap between knowing stewardship is important and actively doing it sometimes tends to live, and sometimes it might be why we're not doing it as much as we want to. So if you think about what your current pipeline tracks, is it more like the top 5 points or the bottom column? If it's more the top column, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Tracking when applications are submitted, when those decisions are due, the amount that's requested, and the outcome is really, really important. You absolutely need to track those things. But if you look at the bottom list, which is more of a relationship pipeline, the last meaningful contact, the key person at the funder, what they care about most, the renewal window, and your next stewardship opportunity. If you have those things in your pipeline, that turns an income tracker into a relationship management tool. And the difference that makes how you work is significant. When you open your pipeline on a Monday morning and you can see at a glance who you haven't spoken to in a while, whose renewal window is coming up, what you know about that funder and what they care about most, that changes what you do with your day, because it helps you see what there is in a relationship way that needs to be done. And it doesn't have to be complicated. If you're working in a simple spreadsheet, you can add those columns in today. That's it. No new system, no lengthy process, just a bit more information that helps you treat funders like the partners they are or potentially could be. So it's just something to think about. And now, if you're looking at your pipeline with those new columns in mind, here's the questions I'd want you to honestly ask yourself about each funder on your list. So, when did I last speak to this funder? By telephone if you can, but we know that's getting more difficult. But if you can, that is the absolute best way to do that. But email is a great alternative. Is there actually a barrier to you calling that you could remove? Sometimes it's just habit. We default to email because it can feel intrusive, because we've come up against things like Sarah's colleague has. A telephone call, when it's well timed and genuine, is always the most powerful tool that you have. But if you have to email them or contact them another way, that's absolutely fine. Or if you've been successful with the trust, have you asked them how they'd like to hear from you? It's such a simple thing to do, and so few people do it. But it also helps you shape your stewardship plan without having to guess what it is that they want from you. When did you last send something that demonstrated impact? Not a formal report, a lovely case study, a client quote, a photo, a one-paragraph update, something that really helps them, if they've already supported you, connect to your project and feel part of it and feel part of that journey, and that they're on it with you, and that they understand the kind of people that are coming through and the kind of impact that their grant is having on your project. Is there anything that you could invite them to? I can see in the chat there's a conversation going on about events. Funders who see your work are more likely to renew. If you haven't got any events that are going on, and it doesn't have to be a trust specific event, you don't have to invent something especially for trusts. You can invite them to any major donor events that you already have. You can invite them to any stewardship kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Potential any donor events that you're having within your organization. You don't have to invent something just for trusts. Even a virtual tour, if you have one of those, or a short video with some of your participants, your beneficiaries, that you can send to them if you have their permission, or if you've got a community event going on, if you're holding a raffle, if you're holding a a walk or a trail or something like that. It doesn't have to be grand. It's just to get them to come along and see the work that you're doing. If it's connected to your project and the project that they're supporting, even better. If you can invite them to the opening of something that they've sponsored, if you can bring them in to come and tour the lovely new building that they've helped supported, anything that you have that can bring them closer to you. Just having a quick look in the chat. Another barrier I experience is when a senior colleague in the organisation holds the relationship rather than myself, and then trying to guide them in doing the necessary stewardship, then finding the time to do so. Absolutely. That is a really, really tricky one. And what I would always say is it's great to involve senior people in your organisation. I would say that everybody should have at least two people looking after them, because if that person was to leave the organization, then they'll take the relationship with them. There needs to be somebody else who's working alongside them that donor also gets to know, so they can either step in when someone's away or step in if something needs doing. So if you can encourage that senior person within your organization to involve you in that, Sam, that I would really have those conversations, because if you're not managing that relationship, it's twofold, then I would say that that's a potential risk if that person was to leave and take all that knowledge and all that relationship management with them. And if you can get in there as well and maybe pick up on some of the slack that they have. I'm trying, Sam. I know it's really hard, isn't it? I would definitely, try and point out that that's a kind of an organisational risk there, not to have you in on that. Hannah says, at the moment, we're only reporting to trust donating over a certain amount. I'm not sure if this is best policy. For me, I would be reporting to anybody who makes a grant to your organisation, because it's really important to look after everybody. You don't necessarily know the potential that trust might have. It might not have much potential now, but it could be that someone leaves them a really lovely legacy, and that they want to give that money out then to people who have been looking after them really well. I've had that happen a couple of times, where I've been stewarding a very, very small trust who's given us a very little bit of money to support what we were doing. But because we looked after them and because we had a really good relationship to them, when they were left a large legacy, we really benefited from that. And also I've had it where trusts have decided to close. And again, because we've looked after them, no matter what size they were, we were left a substantial grant when they closed down that organisation. So you just never know where your potential future support might come from. Even those smaller trusts and foundations might suddenly get an influx of money that can do. Hannah's suggestion of considering a trust and foundations newsletter for those smaller grants, that might be a way to look at it, to get volunteers to help you with some of those smaller grants, might be a way of looking at it. You just need to make sure that whatever you're doing is still personalised. It still feels like it's just been sent to them, that it feels like it's matters to them, because otherwise you're not building a relationship, you're just sending them out information. So whatever you send has to be really tailored as much as possible to them, their circumstances, the project that they've supported, because I think that's really, really important to build on and try and get that relationship going forward. And finally, in this list of questions, are you logging all of this great information, this relationship information that you're finding? If the person that manages this relationship, this goes back to kind of what you were saying, Sam, left tomorrow, would the next person have enough to pick everything up? Have they, it's not always possible if it's somebody external that's coming into the organisation, but what's your succession plan with some of these donors? Do you have all the information there that someone would need to be able to pick up the phone and introduce themselves as the new person now working with that trust? It's really important to put some of that relationship information somewhere really really secure that people can have a look at and read through and see what the best bits of it are. If it only lives in someone's head, it doesn't become an asset, then it becomes a real risk to the organization. So we had a brilliant question submitted today, ahead of today, from Sophie, who's done some great prospect research work, but that means she's adding lots and lots of new trust at her pipeline, and it's just getting longer and longer, and she's struggling with the time to actually apply, do this stewardship, do some more potential. But I think this is one of the most common and most honest things I hear from trust fundraisers. So I wanted to spend a few minutes on it with us together. And I think it sits where we've just been talking about, using your pipeline as a working, thinking document rather than it just being a place for you to pop everything into. You being able to see it and to use it, and then that helps you use your time wisely. So Kim says, you may come onto this, but really interested in hearing how you log the info. Personally, I have my pipeline, just exactly how we're going to talk about it, as my working thinking document with all the tidbits of information that I need on there, so I can see it at a glance. And then I've used Salesforce in the past. I've found that really good for how I like to do my relationships, and work them through the 7 stages of solicitation, and how that works on Salesforce, to put all of that nitty-gritty information, copies of everything, any conversations I've had, when I last had the telephone conversation. That's where all my detailed work goes. But I use a simple spreadsheet with the columns that we've talked about, and some of the things that we're going to go on to that's my working thinking document, because I like to see everything and be able to manipulate it. It's not as easy to manipulate information in something like Salesforce or Beacon, but I've always loved a spreadsheet, and no matter what fancy CRM system that I do, I always have my spreadsheet with my actual working thinking pipeline on it. And that this is where, when we're talking about relationship things like this and having it all in a glance and being able to do some of the things that I'm going to talk about next. Kim, I love a spreadsheet too. Then that's where I think a spreadsheet really comes into its own, because you can ask these questions really quickly. You just have everything listed and you can go down and ask these questions. So who has a trust in their pipeline that's been there for more than 2 years with no application and no contact? It just sits there. Or is there a trust in your pipeline that's been sat there, you've made applications to it year on year, but you haven't had no feedback, no outcome, and no actual sense of why you're still trying with that one? I see it all the time, and I think it tells you something really important. That entry isn't being managed. You're just letting your pipeline grow and grow and grow. And sometimes when you're putting them into a system like Donify, like Beacon, it's so easy to not always see what you've got. If it's on an actual spreadsheet, you can say that it goes on and on for miles and miles and miles, and that you need to have a look at this. It's not giving you, it's sitting there quietly inflating the sense of how much opportunity you have, or putting pressure on you to make an application without really stopping to check whether there's a genuine alignment there. So a pipeline, I think, full of things like that isn't a resource. It becomes a comfort blanket. And what I want to show you is the distinction between a pipeline as an income forecast, which is really, really important, and a pipeline as a working thinking document. An income forecast is really passive. You tot up the numbers and hope that there's enough of them in your pipeline to come off. A thinking document is active, which is why, again, I prefer that spreadsheet. It asks questions. Which of these is genuinely warm? Which requires a conversation before an application? Has something changed in its priorities and it might no longer be for us? What's been on here for 3 years and honestly shouldn't be? And the difference between thinking about your pipeline in those different ways is one where your trust program grows because it's full of the right people and you're building the right applications and the right relationships, and one that's just plateauing because you've got so much in there you can't see anything in there at all. So to help you make those decisions, there's two questions that I ask to every single entry on my pipeline when you're doing that relationship review that we talked about in the previous slide. Is this still worth pursuing? Are we genuinely aligned with this trust? And would a grant genuinely move my income and make a difference to our organisation? And is this achievable this year? Do I have a realistic shot based on our geography, our grant area, our grant size, the focus area, whether we have the right kind of information? And do we have everything in place internally to be able to go for this opportunity right now? Those two questions turn that forecast into a plan. And it doesn't mean sometimes to get rid of those opportunities. It might just mean that you're going to take them out of your main pipeline sheet and you're going to move them into your archive. You're going to have another look at those at the minute. But what you want now is that focus on those ones that are really going to be your absolutely warmest, best fit. Sophie, I hope that helps as a starting point. We're going to go one step further on the next slide and talk about confidence tiers. So anybody else, Sophie, anybody else that's dealing with a really unruly pipeline, I wanted to share something that Nicola, one of the clients that I've been working with, because her experience, I think, is a really useful example of what happens when you properly overhaul how you manage your pipeline. So when I first started working with Nicola and her team, her pipeline was massive. They didn't know where to focus their time. They didn't always show where a relationship with the funder was and what work there was still left to do. They had lots of trust in their pipeline that had been there a very long time, and they were just making applications to them out of habit. They had people in there where they hadn't rechecked for alignment because so they were just kind of hanging about at the bottom of their pipeline, kind of neither here nor there. But whenever they looked at it, they were like, oh great, we've got loads of trust that we can go after. Our pipeline is really full and we can see where to go, but they couldn't make any of that a priority because they couldn't see the wood for the trees, basically. So having a really good cull of your pipeline is a really good thing to do. What they did was they put everything into one place. So they use Donify as their main database. But what we did was set them up with a spreadsheet that had all of the things that we've just talked about it in, so they could see where they were at a glance. And then they implemented this confidence tier that we're going to talk about in a second. They had their application info, any relationship information they need, just bullet points, just really, with a note to say to have a look in and Donify for other bits and bobs, and also stewardship, where they were with them, so they could see it at a glance. Right, I know in May I need to send this, in June I need to do this, so I need to get it ready. Sometimes when that's hidden inside of your CRM database, it's often harder to see those kind of things, but on a spreadsheet it's absolutely forefront in your face on a Monday morning when you open it up. They removed inactive funders, ineligible funders where they put it on to just give them a try, ones where it's just a general grant maker and we don't really know if we're a close match to them or not. They removed some of those from there because it was just clogging up their pipeline. And then they added this eligibility scoring system with a confidence tier. The result is that they can much more quickly prioritize applications based on fit and relationship, rather than just looking at the numbers that they've got to get through for April or May or whatever month that was. That was just their list of what they were going to do. So their pipeline is a much more valuable tool for them now, and it shows them a much clearer picture of the actual potential for their charity, because they're not having to weed through everything and go, yeah, we've got 100 people that we can go out for, but actually in reality it was probably closer to 30 or 50 that were a really good fit that they could actually go for. And I think the biggest thing that's helped them prioritize is this confidence tier framework. And I think, Sophie, this might help you as well, kind of see what potential there is in your pipeline. I think it's one of the most practical tools you can add to your pipeline right now. So rather than treating every entry as equally likely, which most pipelines do by default, you assign each entry a confidence percentage based on three things: the warmth of your relationship, the strength of the alignment that you have, and the achievability of the ask. Do you have everything you need to be able to submit that application? Are we ready for this internally? If it's it's a really kind of organizational changing amount that you're asking for, how ready are you internally for that change? So I tend to use 4 tiers. So high confidence, that's a funder where you have a really strong relationship. They funded you before, there's a really clear fit. And for me, I'd assign them a 60 to 80% confidence. Those are your anchor entries. Those are what make your pipeline warmer. Those are where you would kind of make sure that you're putting lots of your time, doing lots of stewardship. You're trying to build those really warm relationships with them. Then I've got medium confidence. So they're a good fit. You haven't got a prior relationship with them and it's a competitive fund. So I would give that a 30 to 50% confidence. Those are your really solid prospects. Those are ones where you would spend time rebuilding those relationships before you put in your application, but you can't bank on them for bringing in any funding. Maybe not in the first year, maybe not in the second year. You need to work on them, work with them, make sure you're really well aligned and that you are building that relationship where you can. Then there's the low confidence. So this is where you've got a really cold approach. You've got a weaker alignment with them, not completely out of it altogether, but you've got a weaker. And then you've got a high competition. So for me, that's a 10 to 20% confidence. You might still apply, but with your eyes open about the odds. We know we're just putting this in. It could be that we're trying to just get on their radar and this is the way that we're going to do it. Could be that we might get a smaller grant at the beginning and we can build that relationship up from there. And then I've got very low, and this is the one that a lot of frameworks don't include, but I think this is the most honest one. It barely fits, they're cold, and it's highly competitive. And that for me is 0 to 5%. Sometimes we might apply to these ones in hope, like we were talking about before, the ones where they're a general grant maker and we don't really know, or where we want to start building that relationship over time. That's a completely legitimate choice, but it should be a conscious one rather than something that just drifts onto your list and then stays there and you apply each year and apply each year. Sam says I use a similar framework, but you're more optimistic than me with the percentages. This has been, for me, this has been years of kind of seeing how it fits. And when I do my trust consulting work, this is something that I often introduce to them. And it's usually very close to when you pull it all together, which I'm going to show you in a minute. When you use it as your forecast tool, it's often very close to what they're usually bringing in year on year. So I always think and use that as my kind of benchmark to see if I'm completely off with my percentages. And also it's different if you go through your own pipeline and put that confidence tier in. If you've got lots of low and very low, then you've got a really cold pipeline. So it is going to be harder work and your forecast is going to be a lot lower. You're aiming to get those lovely warm donors into your pipeline, aren't you? So that it improves that 1 in 10 chance. So like I said, once every entry has a confidence percentage, that means you can create a weighted forecast. Sarah's saying that Salesforce does this for you. You put in your percentage, potential amount, and then it predicts potential income. This works exactly the same way. So you divide the ask by the percentage. So say you're putting a £10,000 ask to a 40% medium confidence, that will give you a full £4,000 weighted value forecast. So you add up all of those across your whole pipeline, and then you've got a much more honest picture of what you're likely to bring in. So you're not just looking, if you were doing your forecast without this, or you're using yours as a forecast tool, you'll probably add up everything that you're asking for, and that's kind of bringing you out a baseline figure of where you might be able to get to. Doing it this way with the confidence tier means that you're creating that more honest picture of what you're likely to bring in, and you can go through and change the weighting as relationships change or alignment changes or things change within your organization. But I think working this way helps enormously when you're setting targets and managing those internal expectations, because you've got something to base everything on. You can clearly show that you've gone through, done this exercise, and that's what you're working to. it's not foolproof. You know, Sam was saying that they use different percentages. Nothing's foolproof in trust fundraising. It just gives you something real to work with, and it helps you see really clearly where your time is best spent. You want to use some of those ones where they're higher, where it's warmer. Holly, thank you so much for sharing your percentages in the chat. You see how we're all slightly different in the way that we do this, because it can often be what's right for your organization and what's going on in your pipeline. But having something like that is really, really helpful to, as Holly says, show your trustees how you're working this all out, having those conversations about targets, seeing what the actual potential is in your pipeline, to be able to have those conversations internally. And it just helps me. I like to see what's there. And also, if you're going for a particular target, it helps you see what the gaps are. You know, if you do this exercise and it comes out that you've got a really cold pipeline, then you know that you're going to need to work harder to warm that pipeline up, or you're going to need to look for more trusts that are better aligned with what you're doing to be able to hit that target. I was working with someone a few years ago, and they wanted to hit a £400,000 target, and they had a really, really cold pipeline, you know, a lot at that 10, if not even lower. And if you look at the 1 in 10 for that kind of low, very low area of the pipeline, they need to put out £4 million worth of applications based on what they were doing on an average and how cold their pipeline was, to be able to hit that £400,000 target. That, with the pipeline that they had, that just wasn't going to happen. So we had to have a real conversation about what was achievable within the pipeline that they had and that they'd created. And even if they were to do lots of prospecting, the pipeline was still going to be very cold for at least, you know, 18 to 24 months as they were working through everything and trying to get better aligned applications out of there. It wasn't going to happen overnight. They were hoping that they could get this 400,000 kind of out of thin air. But, you know, once you'd started talking about what that would mean, putting £4 million worth of applications out there, things started to click then, and they could see how that probably wasn't going to happen. So one of the things I hear that people say as a barrier to building a relationship is when they get a rejection. That's the line in the sand for them, where there's no point continuing trying with that trust. And you know, I've seen a discussion in the chat, you know, how long do you leave that? How many no's do you get, or how much silence do you get before you you know, take that trust off your pipeline completely? I think that varies depending on how well aligned you are to that trust. You know, I've heard stories, and I've seen some stories in the chat coming through, that, you know, that persistence has really paid off, and that they've been trying and trying, and then suddenly they got a grant from someone. But I think if you're trying with a trust that it isn't really well aligned, then that's probably giving you your answer, that if you haven't heard anything and you can't get any feedback, then it probably isn't the right fit for you. If you were just trying to see whether there potentially could be something. But if you're really, really well aligned, then that may be where you need to do some of this relationship building exercises. Who do you know? Who could you have a look at? Who could make that relationship a little bit warmer for you? And I think if you're genuinely good fit and you're really well aligned, if you get a no, are you writing back to thank them for their no, for them considering your application? You can say something genuine about their work and why you wanted to be part of it. And you can ask very simply whether they'd be willing to share any feedback with you. They won't always, we know this, don't we? We know that it's not always something that they can give because they don't have the time to do that. But they will remember that you didn't push back on the decision. We didn't ask what it is that you could do differently next time. You're just thanking them for their consideration, a gracious, professional response that then leaves the door open for you to go back to them to try and start building that relationship. And they'll remember it. They will appreciate it enormously. And hopefully, if they can, they'll give you some really useful information. and feedback. We know that's not always possible. Often we get the feedback that they are oversubscribed, and that's absolutely fine if not very useful. But they will remember you as the organisation that responded with grace rather than silence, or worse, defensiveness. And I've had the feedback from a lot of trustees that they don't get a thank you when they send out a no, they just get complete silence. And that also, if you're asked for more information, that you send that back to them in a timely manner. The amount of trustees that tell me that they have no response when they ask for more information or clarification of things, that's a really good sign if you get a trust that takes time out of their day to do that. So please always make sure that you can respond in a timely manner or at all. I've seen personal relationships, I've seen personally relationships that have started from rejection, because the funder has had the presence of mind to stay in touch and handle that rejection really, really well. So if there's one thing that you take away today, if you've got a rejection sat in your inbox and you haven't responded to it yet, just send them a nice thanks so much for getting back to us. And what do we do? So we've talked about what to do about handling a rejection. What if you didn't respond at that time? What if the rejection was 6 months to go? You've said nothing. Can you still get back in touch? Absolutely, you can. I think, and that kind of goes with you've gone quiet for too long. Trustees understand, don't they? Work gets busy, application pipeline takes over, and before you know it, having been in touch with a funder for 8 months, you didn't respond to that no that you got, and it starts to feel really awkward to reach out. And so I wanted to reassure you, funders do understand that. They absolutely do. They've told me that they understand that. They work with charities, they know how stretched that teams are. And a simple, honest note to reintroduce yourself. I'm so sorry, I wanted to get in touch as I realised we haven't connected as much as I'd like to after the past few months. I want to share a quick update on the project so you know what's going on, so you can see the impact of what you've done. No grovelling, no over expectation, just honest and really warm here. Try not to let that gap get so big that in your head reaching out starts to feel impossible. The longer you leave it, the bigger that feels. But the reality is, if you've had a funding from a funder, they'll be really pleased to hear with you, especially if you're telling them a really great update about something that they've supported. And what if something goes wrong in a project? This can really make your heart drop, can't it? Because it feels genuinely uncomfortable having those conversations. But if something's gone wrong with the project that the funders supported, maybe it's delayed, maybe the outcomes have changed, maybe it's not going to work quite how you think it is, please tell them. Tell them before they find out another way. Every instinct is telling you to wait until you have a solution, or to quietly paper over it at the end, in the end of grant report, and hope that they won't notice. But funders who discover problems through reports or through third parties, or because they asked a question and got a vague answer, those relationships are harder to recover. Funders who you've told honestly, who you've told early with a clear expectation, explanation of what you're doing, and maybe even be able to help you come up with a solution, those are the relationships that almost always survive. And they'll get stronger because you've brought them in as a partner on that. Reese says, great suggestions for rejections. What can you do for the funders you never hear back from? Would you email them and send a follow-up letter? What does everyone else do in that situation? So for me, that goes back to that relationship building side of things. So if you can find a warm way into them, maybe through a trustee, maybe through a warm connection, that is always the best way to try and get some of that feedback. If they've got an email, if they've got a telephone, you can absolutely always try and reach out for them. I would suggest if they're not getting in touch with you, they're probably too busy, but maybe that's to do that en masse. Maybe to be able to speak to you one-on-one is something that they can do for you. But I would explore that, explore where you can. There's no reason why you can't try and pick up the telephone. I would say you're going to have to leave quite a big gap. A lot of funders, when in their funding cycle, it might be 7, 8, 9 months before they make a decision. So, by all means try and reach out, but it might be that they won't be able to give you an answer either way, unfortunately, just because of how busy they are. But there's absolutely no reason why you couldn't. Um, and then we had another fantastic question from Holly, who asked about some of those relationship building and some with invite only funders. And I think the most important thing to say here is that as organizations, we need to be really visible. For invite only funders, if they're going off and doing their own research and looking for what they need, looking for what they think they need, we need to make sure our organizations stand up and are discoverable. So attend funder webinars. So meet the funders. I shared these at the beginning of every month, any that I found. Go along, ask your thoughtful questions, get your organization's name out there. They will start to recognize organizations, and they will have a look at them. If something you says resonates with them, they will go and do their own research, and they will have a look at you. Join mailing lists, follow funders on social media. That's also really, really important, so you can keep up to date with what they're doing, but also so you can interact with their posts, whether that's you as the trust fundraiser or you as the organization. Keep your webinars, keep your websites and socials up to date. Talk about impact and need. We're very good when we go out on our socials, talk about, oh, we ran this event, wasn't it a success with this? But we're not very good at talking about what we need. So if a funder goes on there to have a look, they'll go, they've just had a really successful event. They don't need our support. They're doing really well. But if you're not talking about that need, and you're not talking about the impact, and your organizational figures aren't up to date and really showing what you do, then there's nothing there to prick their interest. There's nothing for them to look at. There's nothing for them to kind of want to support you about. Consider sector awards. Are there any memberships or groups that your organization could join? Any speaker opportunities that talk about your particular your particular area of expertise as an organization? If you're working with homeless people, for example, or are there things you can do there? Is there some good figures and information that you have, some really good sector insight that you could talk about? That gets your organization out there. And don't do any of this alone. Often us as trust fundraisers work in really small groups, don't we? It's usually just us. So if you can spread that out through your volunteers, please do that. Shouldn't be all to do. You don't have to do all of these things, just a few of these things. It's just about that invisibility. And then another way to look at Holly's question is to look at your trustee board. Share with them a list of your top 10 to 15 funder prospects. Do they recognize any of them? Are there any connections there? One warm introduction can change everything. And it could be your ambassadors, it could be your volunteers, it could be your colleagues. Someone might know one of these trustees or know someone connected to that trust that might be able to make you a warm introduction. And then look at LinkedIn. This is one of the most underused tools that we have in trust fundraising. Lots of trustees, lots of trusts are now using LinkedIn to talk about what they do. Follow funders, follow those sector conversations, see the kind of organizations that they're supporting, comment, make yourself known. Don't share, and don't be too pushy. And also, if they're following you, what are you sharing on your personal LinkedIn, on your organizational's LinkedIn? Short updates, beneficiary quotes that impact, similar things to what you should be sharing on your social media, Facebook and things like that. And if you can send them thoughtful notes, it's all about not being too pushy, isn't it? It's about saying, here's why we're connected. I'd really be interested. I think your trust is a really good fit for what we do. Would you be willing to have a conversation? Who are you connected with? You might find that someone's connected with that trust that you didn't realize that they were connected with, and you can go around that way and have that conversation with them. Oh, I see you're connected with this trust. We'd love to apply, and have a look for whether there is. LinkedIn is a really good for network mapping. And then look, is there an expression of interest route that you can take? Just a short, clear one side of A4 if you are really, really well aligned and they are open to some sort of communication. Some of them do say that they'll accept an expression of interest. That's an absolutely good way to go for. If they're truly closed, it's all about that raising your profile. What are you doing to make yourself and your organization visible? How are we connected? Is there a warm way in that we can go to? And it's also some doors are going to be closed and there isn't any way to open them, no matter how well connected and aligned that you are with that trust. And that's just something that you have to accept, unfortunately, that that trust is invite only for a reason. They want to support the organizations that they want to support, and there isn't any way to make you, other than what all the things that you've tried, there is no other way that you're going to be able to make yourself visible for them to be able to support you. But if you're doing everything that you can, everything that we've just talked about, to get yourself out there, and you're mapping those relationships, you've got a really good robust stewardship plan in place, you're doing the very, very best that you can to try and get in front of them. But it's not foolproof, and not all trusts are going to be open for that. So I hope that's helpful for you, Holly. That's it from me from this week, and we've just hit 1 o'clock, so we did really, really well to fit all of that in. Thank you so much, everybody, for your input. It's been really interesting to hear your thoughts on relationships. Our next Let's Chat Trust Fundraising is the 19th of May at 12 noon. It's a little bit earlier because we've got half term next month. And also we're launching the Huddle. For anybody who's not heard about this, it's our new co-working live group, which will be launching on this Thursday at 11 a.m. over in our Facebook group. So you can bring things that you're working with on your Garfield Western application, National Lottery application, and we can help you with our own input and try and support you on that. We're just going to be all working together on our project, so we can, it's like a sounding board in case you're struggling with anything. So I really, really hope to see you all at our next session, and to see some of you on Thursday at the Huddle. I really hope you found today useful. Thank you so much. It makes it just makes these sessions so lovely to have you all join us and put all your input and experience in there as well. So if anyone would like to talk offline, please do reach out to me. If you have a question that wasn't answered today, you've got a thought that you'd want to share with me, and I look forward to seeing you all in May, if not on Thursday. Take care, everyone. Thanks so much. Have a good rest of the week. Bye, everyone.